one of the most common things I hear is, oh, my hamstrings are short or my hamstrings feel tight. Okay, so let's work on that. And we're gonna go beyond just passively stretching. So you might need a yoga strap or belt of some sort. Another option is if you struggle to bring your leg perpendicular to the floor, so that 90-degree angle, it can be nice to use a wall or a doorway when we come into the passive stretch. So if you're using the doorway, then you would stretch the opposite leg through the doorway, and the leg that we're working on stretching, you can just rest that heel up against the wall. That might be a little bit easier, more supportive than trying to struggle with a strap. What's very important, no matter how you set up the initial passive stretch position, is to make sure that there's still some space between your lumbar spine and the floor. So we want to maintain that natural curvature in the low back, so that when we're coming into hip flexion here, it's purely hip flexion and you're not rounding your spine and pressing your low back into the mat and lifting your butt up. Okay, so I have a little bit more range of motion than that, so I'm going to scoot away from the wall here, and I'm going to use a strap on my foot. I'm going to pull here into my passive range of hip flexion. I've got a lot, but I just want to make sure here that I still am maintaining that little bit of space between my low back and the floor. As soon as I come into straight leg hip flexion here and I feel myself starting to round into my low back, I know I've gone too far. Another thing is, if you feel the stretch in the back of the knee, then please bend your knee a bit. We want to feel the stretch here kind of in the center of the hamstrings, not so much back of knee, that's more nerve stuff going on. But feel the stretch here kind of in the meat of your hamstrings. Okay, so once you've settled in here, you're going to hold here for several deep and full breaths. Take a full breath in, exhale slowly out, and continue to take full breaths in, nice and slow, and even slower exhales out. And as you're here, you may notice over time, while we're stretching here and breathing, that you might be able to come a little bit deeper into hip flexion. Again, just being mindful of your low back, that you aren't flexing and pressing the low back into the floor. And ideally, we could stay here in this stretch for 2 minutes or longer. So if you have that time to stay longer, you can pause the video and stay. Otherwise, we're going to do a round of PAILs and RAILs here, isometrics. So don't start yet, but if you have your heel against a wall, your PAILs contraction is going to be to try to drive your heel through the wall and also to drag your heel down the wall. So we want to get not only the pushing out of hip flexion, but also the bending of the knee. So we get the hamstrings, those upper and lower, we get all this hamstring tissue to fire up during our PAILs contraction. Of course, if you have a strap, you're gonna hold tightly onto the strap. At the same time, you're gonna try to push the leg away from you and bend the knee. And just your yanking on the strap is gonna prevent those things from actually happening. And for our RAILs contraction, do not go into the low back. You're going to squeeze kind of the tissue here on the front of the hip if you're at the wall. You're going to try to pull that heel off the wall to come deeper into hip flexion. Of course, if you have your strap, you're just going to lightly hold the strap or let go of it and try to pull that leg closer into your body. Again, being very mindful that you're not just rounding the low back and using lumbar spine to create more hip flexion during the RAILs contraction. Okay, let's give this a go. Let's take a full breath in, exhale out, pack the breath low into your belly. Start with 10% effort, so start low, trying to push whatever leg you have lifted up, trying to push that away from you, as well as to bend the knee. So it's pushing away and bending the knee. Ramp that up 20%. And if you touch your hamstring, should feel some hamstring contraction, some glute as well. Let's go 30 to 40%. You got the strap, hold on to the strap. Bit more, 50 to 60%. Okay, my leg is shaking. Yours should be shaking a bit here as well too. Keep trying to push the leg away and bend the knee. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Without going into the low back, squeeze the muscles here in the front of the hip. Try to pull that leg closer in. Again, if you're at your end range of motion, you're not going to get huge movement here, if any at all. So if you have the heel against the wall, you're trying to lift the heel against the wall. Again, don't go into the low back. You can even place your hands to your low back, make sure that space is still there. Keep trying to pull that leg in, engaging the front of the hip. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Relax, keep that leg up and breathe. If you have a strap, you might be able to pull the leg a little bit further in. If you're at the wall, you might be able to kind of scoot a bit closer into the wall. Let's do PAILs and RAILs one more time. Take a full breath in. Exhale out, pack the breath low. 10 to 20%. Start trying to push the leg away from you and bend the knee. You want to really light up that hamstring tissue. 30 to 40%. 50 to 60%, maybe a little bit more effort this time. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Squeeze the muscles here at the front of the hip. Try to close this angle of hip flexion even more. Don't go into the low back. Check. Shouldn't be rounding through the low back. 5, keep pulling that leg in. 4, 3, 2, 1. Pause and breathe. Hold the leg up. Keep the leg up. Don't lower it yet. So why we're doing PAILs and RAILs here, the PAILs contraction, engaging the tissue muscles that are lengthening or on stretch, namely hamstrings here. That's giving us an opportunity to override our stretch reflex. And then we don't just stop there by overriding the stretch reflex. Then the RAILs contraction, the act of engaging the muscles here at the front of the hip to try to actively increase hip flexion, that helps to teach your nervous system that you can be strong in that range of motion. You can actively own it. Okay, so we want to try to strengthen using isometrics, tissue on either side of the joint. We got back of the hip, front of the hip in this case. So now, let's do a little bit of end range training. So we're going to do some passive range liftoffs. So we're in passive range here. You're going to have to back out of that passive range a little bit. So again, if you're at the wall, you're going to scoot your body away from the wall so that you have less hip flexion. If you have the leg up in the air with the strap, what I'm going to do here is place it behind my leg. So this is my passive range. I'm going to take my leg a little bit out of that range. And then we're going to start the passive range liftoffs from here. So a passive range liftoff is like a RAILs contraction. We're still engaging the regressive tissue, in this case the muscles at the front of the hip. But this time we're actually, because we backed out of end range a little bit, we will actually get a liftoff or a slight concentric movement. So what it's going to look like here, I'm going to keep my strap as it is. I'm going to lift off, pull my leg in, and come back to the strap. Or come back to your heel at the wall. And continue, squeeze hip flexors, don't go into the low back. Pull the leg in, and set back. And 3, squeeze, set down, and 4, really speak to that hip flexor tissue, set down, and 5, set down, 5 more. Really note that you're not going into the low back. Squeeze the front of the hip, come into deeper hip flexion, set down, and 7, and 8, 2 more, and 9, squeeze hip flexors, set back down, last one, hold active hip flexion, pull in as much as you can using your hip flexors, check the low back, there should still be a little bit of space there, hold for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's slowly lower on out of that. Okay, so that's taking hamstring stretching up another level. We're actively looking to strengthen that end range so that you can actually gain more range and then you can actually utilize it. So now you got to do the other leg.